Good
Okay.
evening to all the attendees, 12th grade students, parents, and high school counselors. Thank you once again for joining us for the Admissions 101 workshop series hosted by Knowledge at KPT Kunal Parekh High School Tours. Today, we have a wonderful gentleman who's going to be presenting to us about steps to finding and applying to colleges in the US. I know this is a topic that has been very much asked for by counselors, students, and parents. So, we have Mr. Marco who will be helping us with understanding with some insights about applying to colleges in the US. And of course, he will then be presenting in the second half of the program about his institution, Gettysburg College. As you've seen in our outreach email that has gone out to you, you can post your questions in the Q&A box. Please do not post them in the chat box. So Mr. Marco, at the end of the session, will be able to answer all of your wonderful questions, and I'm sure he's looking forward to them. Having said that, we will be having a session for 1 hour and then we'll be proceeding with the Q&A. So we will please be patient till your question will be answered towards the end. And without further ado, I'm now going to hand over the stage as well as the microphone to Mr. Marco Blasco from Gettysburg College. Good morning, Marco. Thank you very much for your kind time in joining us. We know it's early in the morning, so we truly appreciate your kind time and all the best for the session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kunal. I really appreciate it. And I'm really happy to be here with everyone today. I know that in this virtual world, it can be difficult to take some time out of your day to, get on another Zoom meeting. So I really appreciate everyone taking the time today to be here. Today, I'm going to go over some steps to finding and applying to colleges in the US. I know that this process can be a little confusing, especially when you're applying to schools in the United States that might have a lot of different criteria and a lot of different application process. So I'm hoping to shed some light generally on different types of institutions and the application process and steps that you can take. And I'm sure you've already been taking some of these steps to make this process a little bit easier. So just a little bit about me first. Kunal gave me a great introduction, so I really appreciate that. I work at Gettysburg College. I'm going into my third year there in the admissions office. I have a fair amount of international experience as well. So I traveled last fall when we could travel all over Asia and Southeast Asia to recruit for Gettysburg and do international recruitment. So I'm very much aware of the struggles and the trials and tribulations of being an international student and wanting to come and study in the United States. So I've worked with students, I've read applications from all over the world. So I am very familiar with the international student process and how that works. So I'm really glad that I could be here today. All right, so I have kind of a rhetorical question, I guess, and this step might be something that students, when you're first starting out, so, you might be past this stage, but I think this helps to put it in perspective as you are researching and looking at more schools and finding schools in the US. The question of how many colleges and universities are there actually in the United States? And I think you'll be a little bit surprised. So there are over 4,000 accredited colleges and universities in the US. And I just like to start out with this stat because I think it paints a picture of how many different institutions there are. And I know that can seem overwhelming. And when you're looking specifically at schools in the US, schools like Gettysburg, schools different from Gettysburg, it's definitely overwhelming. And you might start to think, well, how will I know the right fit, right? How will I find the school that has my major, that is a school where I know I'm going to succeed, where I will go, have a great education, and get a job afterwards? And that's something that I think a lot of students, especially international students who might not have the chance to visit a campus or who might not have a chance to come and visit a few schools in the US, they have that question. So there are a lot of schools, but here my goal is to hopefully help you begin to sort of narrow down that list, look at this process in a different way, and not just say, oh my goodness, there's 4,000 schools. How do I decide? So I think we can start by answering basic questions. And again, if you're going into your 12th grade year, you might have already answered a lot of these questions, but I think it's good to start to frame it, or if you haven't specifically asked yourself these questions, then maybe this is a good time to start doing that. So I think one of the most important questions to start with is, why do you want to study in the United States? And I know that might seem like a very simple question, but is it for the cultural experience? Is it for the education system? Is it for the different types of majors that are offered in a lot of US universities, right? I think all of the answers to all of these questions can help you sort of narrow down the types of school that you're looking at. And then it might help you go through the application process with a little bit more ease. And because we're living in this virtual world, and everyone now, a lot of colleges and universities in the United States are doing virtual panels like these, or virtual visits, or different things. I think now is a very unique time for international students, because schools, colleges, and universities that did not have virtual opportunities before now have them. So now, I know that COVID is not what we want, obviously, but I think the fact that the more virtual opportunities are coming from this virtual world we're living in, so that can be a silver lining in this scenario. So think about that question, and maybe think about the question of, why do you want to study in the United States, as we're going through this presentation, because all of the questions sort of come from that question. So I think one of the biggest factors as well is, where do you want to live in the US? Like any country, the US has very diverse populations and very diverse communities. And so urban versus rural, I think, is a very big question when you're thinking of, where do you want to come study in the US. So for instance, this is a photo of Gettysburg's campus. We are a fairly rural campus, and there's plenty of positives to that. We have a small college town. It's a very safe campus. It's a campus that's very walkable, easy to get around. You don't have to take public transportation to class or anything. Students live on campus for all 4 years. So there's differences between rural and urban campuses. For urban campuses, you have a lot of access to the city that you're in, but you might have to live off campus, for example. So thinking about maybe what you're used to at home, where you live now, and then thinking about, okay, where do I want that experience? Do I want to experience a large city in the United States, like New York or Los Angeles or San Francisco? Or do I want to experience a smaller town? I think one thing to keep in mind is, obviously a lot of people are aware of the big cities, but you might not have heard of the small towns. But I think it's just something to keep in mind, that most colleges in rural areas in the United States are very close-knit residential communities. So students will live there, and that residential experience is a really big part of the college experience when you live in a more rural campus. So that's something to keep in mind as you're going through as well, is, what is the location? Where is the college located? Is it right in the center of a city? Is it outside of a city? So urban and rural is definitely something to think about as you are searching for schools and thinking, where do I want to live? Because it is a big decision, right? You're going to spend your next 4 years at that school. So it's something to keep in mind: location, urban versus rural. There are different kinds. So there might be a suburban area, which might be right outside of a city. So it's not quite in a rural area, but it still has access to a major city. So that's something to think about as well. A lot of rural campuses have access to large cities too. So Gettysburg, for example, we are not far from Washington, D.C., and that's a pretty easy city for our students to get to. All right, and I think this question, where will you fit in best, is also a very, I want to say, hot topic, right? So students will really think about this question a lot, and I'm sure all of you have thought about it. So where will you fit best? There's a few things to think about. And this also ties in with the application process, which I'll talk about in a little bit towards the end of this first part here. but the public versus the private question. And so in the United States, there are a few different types of colleges and universities. And so there's large public universities that might have upwards of 30,000, 40,000 students. And there are smaller, excuse me, smaller private colleges like Gettysburg that might have a few thousand, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 students. So they are vastly different experiences. And so when you're thinking about the opportunities at a school, I think oftentimes it's assumed that at a smaller school, at a private school, you may not have access to the same amount of opportunities as a large public university. And I think that that line of thinking is a little bit flawed because there are a lot of opportunities at smaller private institutions. I think it comes down to more of the experience that you want to have. And so students who want to be at a large university, they want to have, in the United States, you might think of football or sporting events that are huge, large scale on TV. They might want to have the sort of really have students from all over the world and, have 30,000 other classmates, right? And kind of be in that large university setting where other students might say, that's too large for me. I think I want to be at a private school, a smaller school, smaller class sizes, really get to know my professors. I think there are pros and cons to both experiences. I think when you're thinking about a public university, some of them have amazing research opportunities or, really in-depth graduate schools. Oftentimes, private schools, smaller private schools won't have graduate schools within the college themselves. So students who want to go to graduate school will apply and go somewhere else. And not that that's, a difficult thing to do, but it's just something to keep in mind. You'll often hear the term liberal arts, right? So a lot of smaller private schools are liberal arts schools. And that is just a different type of experience than a larger public university. And not that this is a deep dive into the liberal arts here in this presentation, but the liberal arts will provide, I think, a variety of learning. So not only are you learning your subjects and the different areas within your major, but you're also taking classes outside of your major. And it's a very well-rounded education. A lot of smaller private institutions are liberal arts colleges, whereas public institutions are usually not. And what that means is you might apply directly to your major and sort of do that all 4 years. And so it'll be something that you do all 4 years. You don't really stray from that path, and it's sort of figured out right from the beginning. Whereas in a liberal arts setting, usually the smaller schools, you can explore a little bit. You can double major. You can take different courses. And so it's a little bit more well-rounded, in my opinion. So when thinking about yourself as a student and what you sort of are interested in and bring to the table, public versus private, small versus large, liberal arts versus non-liberal arts, those are things to keep in mind when you're thinking about fit. All right, and this is another great question, I think. So when you're going through, okay, which college is great fit and which college meets your needs, right? So maybe you decide, okay, I know that I'm not great at really large schools. I don't want to go to a school that has 30,000, 40,000 students. I want to go to a small school. Which of these schools meets my needs? And that's where you want to start researching majors. Right. And I think it's good to keep an open mind. You may change your mind once you get to college, or you may not really know what you want to study, and that's okay. But thinking, okay, do they have a field I'm interested in? So looking at the major list on a college's website or asking an admissions counselor, what have students done in that major? What have they gone on to do? Research and internship opportunities as well. So if you're thinking about wanting to go to graduate school or wanting to work, whether that be in the United States after you graduate or going back home and working. Thinking and keeping those things in mind and what opportunities your college or university will offer is super important. I did mention, some larger universities might have research experience. and really good research opportunities. And that's really true, but oftentimes it's for graduate students. So as an undergraduate student, you might have difficulty accessing a lot of these research opportunities when you're competing with graduate students. And so at a smaller school, oftentimes undergraduate students are able to conduct research. At all schools, there should be a career center. There should be a place where you have the opportunity to go and search for internships and have career counseling. And so you'll probably want to ask the questions regarding internships and how many students do internships, how many students have access to internships and have access to programs or opportunities where they are exposed to these internship opportunities so that you are able to search for them, whether that be in the US or back at home, because internships are becoming almost, they're valuable and they're almost necessary to getting jobs and getting experience as you're going throughout your college process. So those are definitely good questions to keep in mind. The extracurricular activities piece as well. So thinking about, okay, yes, my academics come first, but college and university in the United States is also about that social experience, right? And so what other extracurricular activities am I interested in? Do I have other interests? Most colleges have more than a few hundred clubs on their campuses. So thinking about, okay, what might I want to be involved in? What are some things I might do outside of my school work right now that I want to continue doing in college? Maybe it's music, maybe it's a sport, maybe it is a club that you've never tried, but you found on the website of a school. And so keeping that in mind, because you also have to have your needs met for the extracurricular activities, the social life, all of those pieces are super important. And then the on-campus housing piece, and I mentioned this a little bit beforehand, but when you're thinking about where you're living, urban versus rural, right? Thinking about that, will I live on campus? Will the college provide me college housing? Or will I have to search for my own apartment within a city? And some students want to have that experience. Some students want to live in a residential college campus. And so those are just some things to keep in mind. How does the college guarantee, for how many years does the college guarantee housing? Some schools in the US, it might be 1 year, it might be 2, or it might be a school like Gettysburg where it's all 4 years. So asking that question when you're thinking about, do I want to move off campus? Do I want to live in a city? Do I want to have to rent an apartment from a landlord or just go through the school? So that's something else to keep in mind when you're thinking of, will a college meet my needs? And then another huge piece when you're thinking about financial aid, merit scholarship, will I need financial assistance? Is this a part of my college search process? So when you're thinking about that, really, I think it's really important to do your research. Not all colleges and universities in the United States are able to give financial aid to international students. So it really depends. So doing your research, asking those questions of the admissions counselors is very important. There's a few different types of financial assistance within the US system. And so merit scholarships and need-based aid are two of the biggest ones. Merit scholarships are granted to students based on their academics. So based on your grades, based on your SAT scores or standardized test scores. The criteria will be different at each school, which I know can be a little bit confusing, but each school has a different criteria for their merit scholarships. And so again, when you're going through the application process, either looking on the website or asking those questions. Some schools will have different levels of merit scholarship, but that is largely based on your academic performance. The need-based financial aid is based solely on your financial need, you and your family's financial need. And so different forms will be required along with your application for the need-based financial aid. And then that can usually be used together with your merit scholarships to create a financial aid package. And so that is something to keep in mind as you're going through the process. Will I need financial assistance to afford college in the United States? And then thinking about, okay, what does this school offer? Do they offer merit scholarships? Do they offer need-based financial aid, or do they offer both? Another piece of that is on-campus employment, as well as application fees. So some students are able to get work study and they're able to work on campus, even as international students. And so being able to do that, that can provide some funding for a student to work while they're studying and have some income that they're able to use, whether that be for books or extra food or whatever it might be, some spending money. So thinking about that, asking those questions of the financial aid office, is there on-campus employment available for students, for international students when I get to campus? And then application fees. Application fees can sometimes be expensive depending on the university. A lot of times it will differ for international students as well. So specifically at Gettysburg College, for example, there is an application fee for domestic students, for American students, but there is no application fee for international students. So just keeping that in mind as you're going through, usually it might be around $60, 60 US dollars, depending on the institution. So that's just something to know when you're applying to schools, applying to for one or two schools, it might not be a large issue, but if you apply to 10, then that can start to add up. So just asking that question, oftentimes there are application fee waivers or different ways around that if the institution, does have an application fee. So once you've asked yourself a lot of these questions and you're at the point where you're thinking of narrowing down your choices, I think it's smart to have a shorter list rather than a list of 15 or 20 schools. That can be really difficult, one, to just apply to, and two, to really decide where you want to be for the next 4 years. I think narrowing it down smaller than that is beneficial, and it can help you as a student, as a parent, as a family, to sort of decide where you want to be. So there's a few ways to do this. Utilizing independent websites, and so researching more about the college. You see in a few bullet points down there referring to college websites such as gettysburg.edu, using independent websites such as the College Board. So going on there and really narrowing down your choices, using search engines. So if you're really thinking about, I really want to study economics, and you can look and just search in Google, what are, the top economics schools in the US, or schools with economics majors, and then you're able to find some schools that way. Attending fairs or virtual presentations, like the one we're doing right now. So you're already doing some of these steps, or scheduling a visit and contacting your admissions counselor. So my colleague Danielle and I, who work with international students very closely, we will sit down one-on-one and have these conversations with students. I think any good admissions office will do that with you. And so don't be afraid to reach out to try to schedule a visit or an information session, or just a contact with someone who works in the admissions office to really ask those specific questions. So these are just a few different resources that you can kind of think of when you're thinking of narrowing down your choices. When we talked about in the beginning, the 4,000 accredited universities in the United States, this can start to help narrow down that list a little bit. All right, and I know that this is a very big part of the process, and it definitely could be an entire presentation on its own. But completing the application, I think the first and most important bullet point to get started is that first bullet point, understanding your deadlines and the application options. As you probably will hear, and as you probably know, as you're researching schools in the United States, we do not necessarily have one uniform application process in the US. Each school may be a little bit different. And I know that that can be frustrating and a little difficult to understand sometimes. So it's really important to think about the schools that you're applying to, which is why I also go back to having a smaller list of schools, because it's easier for you to understand the application process at each school. Generally, they'll ask for the same materials, but there might be a few nuances within the process when you're going through to keep in mind, or forms that you have to submit, or different things like that. So the application itself is obviously, one of the most important pieces. A lot of schools are on the Common Application. Some schools still do have their own homegrown application that will just be on their website and that you fill out. Gettysburg, for instance, we are a Common App school. So any school on the Common Application, you can fill out that one application and apply to any school who is a Common Application school. So that's just something to keep in mind. You might be applying to 5 colleges, 4 of them may be on the Common Application, and then the 5th one you have to fill out a completely separate application for. So it will really depend on the school. The essay is the personal statement. I know that's something that a lot of students have a lot of questions about, and it may be a difficult piece of the essay or a piece of the application, to really think about and know what are admissions counselors looking for in the personal statement, in the essay. And I like to say that within your application, the essay is really the only piece where you are talking about yourself in your own words. And what I mean by that is, if you look at the other pieces of the application, your transcripts your grades are talking for you. Your test scores, the scores are talking for you. Your letters of recommendation, your counselor or your teacher is talking for you. But in the essay, you as the student have the ability, have the power to talk about your own experience in your own words. And that is a really powerful part of the application, because you can give me a little bit more about you personally. You can give me a little bit more of your story. It's the only time you can really say, I did this or I had this experience. Otherwise, everything else is kind of talking about your experience from the outside. So when thinking about the essay, it's just a little piece to tell me or another admissions counselor a little bit more about your experience, about something you're passionate about, something you're interested in. And so that's a really good place to do that. The transcripts and test scores, I'll put these together. They are your grades and your standardized testing, right? So you can think of your transcript as your resume, basically, when you're applying to college. That will be, all of your high school transcripts, all of your grades, all of your classes together, and that is submitted. We look very closely, a lot of schools, when I talked about the merit scholarship piece, schools will look very closely at the transcripts to decide about merit scholarship and where they'll award merit scholarship and to which students will receive merit scholarship. So those grades are really important. A lot of schools will look at them in a similar way. They'll look at rigor, honors, AP, IB, whatever your school might offer that is a higher level course. That will also go far in when a school is looking at your transcript and thinking about, will I award this student merit scholarship? So challenging yourself in some way is very beneficial for you, I think, because it helps you stand out in the U.S. application process, and you can be rewarded for that through merit scholarship. Standardized test scores. A little note about that as well. I know in a normal year, testing is easier to access, but I know within this virtual world, this COVID world that we're living in, a lot of standardized test scores are not accessible to students this year. So that's something else to keep in mind. Usually schools are requiring or recommending SAT or ACT scores, especially maybe for international students. If English is not your first language, then standardized test scores are another way for colleges to gauge that, along with English language ability tests, which I'll get to in a second. But a lot of schools are also moving in the US to a test optional policy. And so schools that are test optional do not require SAT or ACT for students to be admitted. Now, I know there's a lot of questions around that. And again, that could probably be an entirely another presentation. But if anyone has more questions about that, definitely put them in the Q&A and I'll get to them at the end. But essentially, schools will look more closely at your high school transcripts, at your experience, maybe even a little bit of your leadership abilities or your out of school activities, and looking at those different pieces to award merit scholarship. So if you haven't been able to take standardized test scores because tests got canceled or anything like that, just know that it's okay. And a lot of, I would say all U.S. colleges and universities right now are very aware of that, and we're very okay with it. And we are living in this world too, and so we're going through this process as well. Just as an example, Gettysburg has been test optional way before this year. So a lot of schools have already moved in that direction. um, a vast majority of our students still do submit SAT scores, and we still look at them and take that into consideration. But students do not have to do that. So that's something to keep in mind. English language ability test is another piece. Um, Again, the requirements may be a little bit different at each school. A lot of schools will have a recommendation or a cutoff at which point we recommend that students score to this level in their English language ability test. So that may be the TOEFL or the IELTS or the Duolingo English test, whatever that might be, or whatever school accepts. So looking at what tests that your college or university that you're applying to accepts, it might be different at each school, and the recommended score may be different at each school. And so they do look at that. Those tests can also be waived depending on your high school experience. So if you have taken multiple years of your classes all in English at an international school or something like that, then that test might be waived. But again, that rule will depend on the school or college that you're applying to. Recommendation letters. So that will be your high school counselor or high school principal or teacher who kind of is helping guide you through the college process, as well as oftentimes your teachers. So some schools will require more than one teacher recommendation. Some schools will only want one. So again, just keeping that in mind as you're looking at the application requirements for each individual school. How many letters of recommendation do they want? Usually they'll at least require one counselor or principal and one teacher. So that's just something to keep in mind as you're going through and looking at the letters of recommendation. Financial aid forms. So I did mention briefly before, when you're applying for need-based financial aid, you will also have to submit international financial aid application or the certification of finances form. It may depend on the school again. So that school website is going to be your best friend in that application process page. But submitting those different forms so that you are eligible to receive need-based financial aid. So just making sure that when you submit your application, you also submit those financial aid forms. And then another piece, usually I would say this takes place at smaller institutions, but interviews can be a good part of the application. Usually they are not required. Oftentimes they are highly recommended at smaller schools. And usually that's just an informal conversation with an admissions counselor, them just getting to know you a little bit better, asking you some questions about your high school experience, about your extracurricular activities or things that you do outside of school. And that just adds, I would say, a more human piece to the application. So oftentimes smaller schools, because we have less applications overall, we are able to do more interviews with our students. So that's just something to keep in mind as you're going through all the parts of your application. I know it sounds a little complicated, looking at a list like this, but once you start to dig into your applications and really looking at the websites of the different colleges and universities and looking at all the pieces that are required, I think it'll start to make a little bit more sense. And then you'll notice that a lot of schools do require the same thing. So it's not like for every school you may have a completely different application. It won't be anything like that. There might just be a few nuances. So for instance, some schools might do interviews, some schools might not even offer them. So just keeping those things in mind as you're going through. All right. So I'm going to go into a little bit more about Gettysburg College specifically, but if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A. I know I've seen a few pop in there, and then I will definitely get to those questions at the end. But if I did have my personal contact as well on the front slide, but this is our international email. too. So if you want to email that, my colleague Danielle and I both see those emails. So then we're able to get back to people a little bit faster as well. All right, so I'll go into a little bit more detail now about Gettysburg College specifically. So we just talked about colleges and universities in general in the United States and what are some different options. So on that scale of different options, Gettysburg is a small liberal arts school, a small college of liberal arts and sciences. We're located in South Central Pennsylvania. So you'll see on the map there, that's a map of the East Coast of the United States. We are sort of right in the middle of Pennsylvania. Like I mentioned, we're about an hour and a half north of Washington, D.C. We're about 2 hours west of Philadelphia, about 4 hours from New York City. So in the Northeast especially, there are a lot of major cities, and so we're not far from any of them. We have about 2,600 students, as you can see on the infographic there. So we are about we're on the smaller side, but as far as liberal arts schools go around us, I do think we actually have a little bit more students than a lot of similar schools in Pennsylvania around us, who have about 2,000 students. So we are a little bit larger. We have students on campus, usually from 40 states and about 40 countries around the world. So we are very much represented around the world and around the United States, which I really admire. I think as a smaller institution, we still have students from all over the world. And it's great to be able to go to different places. And when I travel and have meet Gettysburg alumni from all over the world, it's a pretty cool experience. And so I think that's something to keep in mind. Like I mentioned earlier, we are a more rural campus, but we do have access. We do have major transportation to Gettysburg. So when you're thinking about flying from halfway across the world to Gettysburg College, it's very easy. So you'll see Baltimore and Washington, D.C. there. There's two major airports, both in Baltimore and Washington, D.C., that do international flights. They're very easy to get into. So when students are coming from far away, they'll usually fly into those airports, and then they'll have arranged a college shuttle right from the college. So our transportation office to pick them up and take them right back to school. So it's very easy when I travel internationally. Back in the good old days when I travel internationally, I would fly usually out of Dulles Airport in Washington, D.C. I would have the college shuttle take me to the airport so I wouldn't have to worry about luggage or driving or anything like that, and then take me back when I got back home. So it's very easy. Our location is also a very historic location. So if you if you know anything about the history of the United States, the Battle of Gettysburg, the American Civil War happened basically right through our campus in 1863. And so there is a lot of history on our campus. We have a legacy of history. There are buildings on campus that were around during the Civil War. And so our students, not necessarily that they are all super interested in history or want to major in history or anything like that, but I do think it creates a good knowledge of the past. It creates a good acknowledgement of the major turning point in American history that happened right in Gettysburg. And it's something that I think you reflect on as a student and realize that you are a part of this legacy and of the history of the place. And so that is something that I think I've come to really appreciate about Gettysburg as well, is the historic location, the access to major cities. But the town of Gettysburg itself is only a couple blocks from campus. So being able to walk into town or go get a coffee with your friends in town is very easy. It's a couple minute walk. And so that's nothing that you have to worry about. The campus itself, here's some fast facts as I talk, but the campus itself is very residential. So you'll kind of see actually my background is of campus in the springtime. And so it's very walkable. Students will live on campus for all 4 years, and that becomes a big part of the residential experience. So students do not necessarily have to move off campus. You have your friends, you have your group of people, you have your students that you want to be around all the time, and you aren't spread out, across a major city or anything like that. You're with those students at all times. These are some kind of fast facts about Gettysburg. And I think that obviously I won't necessarily read everything off to you, but I think some of the top ones that I can kind of talk about, major points for Gettysburg. So our average class size, the blue block down there, and student to faculty ratio. So before, when I was talking about schools that are maybe larger public universities that have 30, 40,000 students versus a smaller school like Gettysburg that has about 2,600 students. Your first year classes at a larger university may be well over 200, 300 students in a large lecture hall, and you won't really be able to get to know your classmates. You won't really be able to get to know your professors because it's just too large. But at a smaller school where your average class size is 17, you will really get to know your professors. You will really get to know your other classmates, and your upperclassmen who can help you and kind of teach you the ways of school and college and how to adjust. And maybe if they took that class before, be able to offer some guidance. And so the average class size, I think, is a really important piece here at Gettysburg. I know that when we talk about research opportunities, I think people don't necessarily think of liberal arts college and research opportunities, but over 50%, you'll see there, it's closer to 55% of our student body will do individualized research with a faculty member, not just in the natural sciences. It might be in our health sciences or in biology or in chemistry, but it also may be in the social sciences. It might be in political science or in economics or history or English. It happens in all fields. But a lot of those research opportunities come from the small class size because students are able to really work one-on-one with the professor and get to know their professors very well. And so being able to get to know the professors really well, being able to establish that relationship, and then take that or their interest and create a research project out of it. And not only is that really great for your resume, right? When you are able to put down on your resume that you did this research, that you were able to be published, oftentimes in an official publication with your research, with your professor. But also, if you're thinking about jobs or graduate school after college, that research opportunity and that research experience is invaluable because you're able to say that my professor is able to write a letter of recommendation for me on such a personal level, right? They're able to say, I worked really closely with this student. And in the US and a lot of other places, those letters of recommendation for graduate school are some of the most important pieces of your application. So I know everyone's just looking at undergrad right now and trying to figure out that whole process. But if you're trying to keep things in mind in the future, whether that's a job or graduate school, having that connection with a professor, having those letters of recommendation ready to go can really, really help you. So that's just something to keep in mind. The large block at the top here, speaking of jobs in graduate school, is also our placement rate. So I was talking about students doing internships, and it's a really important question to ask, right? How many students complete an internship, at your school? And at Gettysburg, about 80% of students complete at least one internship before graduation. And so that is something that is really, really, again, invaluable because our students are getting that experience, getting that hands-on learning experience in their field and seeing, okay, is this something I want to do for the rest of my life? Is this a job that I know I can do well? Am I interested in this? A lot of students will do multiple internships during their time here. And the way that a lot of students will find those internships is through the Center for Career Engagement. So we do have a career center on campus with one-on-one career counseling, planning out your journey through college and saying, okay, maybe I'll internship this year. I'll try to do more research. And then, hopefully that turns into a job. So a lot of our students who are doing those internships are getting jobs at those companies or startups that they're doing their internships at. And they're finding a lot of those opportunities, not only through the Career Center, but through the connections that the Career Center has with our alumni network. So we have about 30,000 active alumni around the world. And that is a pretty large number for a smaller college of liberal arts and sciences. And our alumni, like I said, I love going to other countries and meeting Gettysburg alumni because they're so active and they want to help students. And so we actually have, for international students, a couple mentoring programs, an alumni mentoring program as well. So when students are on campus and they're thinking about interning or thinking about jobs, we have a way to match students with international alumni that are able to kind of guide them in the process, and seeing the different opportunities that are out there and talking to them about their path and what path they may have taken. We have a 98% placement rate 1 year after graduation. So students are either employed or enrolled in grad school. And so we are really proud of that stat, because students are able to really say that the Gettysburg education and the career counseling and all of those pieces really help them after school. Because we want you to have a great education. We want you to have a great time at Gettysburg, but we want you to get a job. We want you to go on to graduate school and be one of those 30,000 alumni that are active and helping out our current students. So that is also a big part of your experience here, is your alumni experience as well. That's definitely a big part of a lot of US institutions, the alumni connections. So those are all the slides I have about Gettysburg. I definitely think that something else that is worth noting when you're thinking about Gettysburg College as an international student is our Office of International Student Services. And so the Office of International Student Services, I think, does a phenomenal job at providing resources for students and helping them as they go throughout your 4 years. So I mentioned the alumni mentoring program, but we also have a mentoring program for underclassmen and first year students, where an upperclassman, first year international student will help you kind of guide you, right? And might answer your questions. You're coming to an entirely new country. Everything's in English. It's all new and it's exciting at first, but then there's definitely ups and downs in your time here and through that process. So having an upperclassman who's been through that you can count on, I think is extremely, extremely helpful. And I know that a lot of our students find that our International Student Services Office just is a great resource. Our Director of International Student Services, his name is Brad, and he is just a phenomenal person. He cares about our international students. He meets with them one-on-one over the summertime as we are approaching, this new fall, especially with everything that's going on. He's Zooming with students one-on-one, just getting to know them better. He's helping them through the visa process. All of these things, their office is just a great resource. Students work in that office as well. So if you have that on-campus employment, like I talked about, that's a great way to really get that experience, but be maybe in a comfortable scenario, comfortable situation. So you can definitely, if you have any more questions about that, I'd really be happy to go into detail about that as well. But I think I'm ready to dive in and start answering some questions. So Kunal, does that sound good to you?
Absolutely. Please go ahead, Marco. Wonderful presentation. Thank you so much once again.
Of course. All right. So I'll dive in here to the questions. I'll just go down in the order they were submitted. So does location play a role in access to internships and career opportunities in the US? That's a very, very good question. So I think that it can. However, what I will say is that, so for instance, if you are in a very large city, right, in college, and you might think, okay, yeah, there's so many companies here. I'll have access to internships during the school year. And I don't think you're wrong. However, I do think that as a full-time student, you are so busy. You're taking classes, maybe you have an on-campus job, you're studying, you're doing your extracurricular activities. So you might not have time for a full-time internship while you are also a full-time student. So often what our students will do is do internships during the summertime or during the off time. They might look for internships back home, wherever they're from, or they might, if they have the opportunity and have the means, they might look for a summer internship in a larger city. So maybe, you spend your year here at Gettysburg during the school year, and then you end up going to DC or somewhere and living and working in an internship for the summer. But I definitely think that there are opportunities everywhere you go. Definitely a lot of those larger cities will have, a vast majority of the internship opportunities. But like I said, I would say a large majority of US students are not necessarily doing that while they are a full-time student. A lot of campuses will offer some internships as well. So in the admissions office, for instance, we have internships that we offer our students that they can do during the school year. Our communications and marketing office also offers a marketing internship that students can do during the school year. So a lot of colleges will have internships in our professional offices, in our administrative offices as well. So that's something to keep in mind, and you can ask those questions too when you're thinking about that. All right. So next question is, how would learning and classroom experience differ in large public universities versus small private colleges? And so that's a really good question. We talked a little bit about that in terms of class size, right? So at a larger public university, oftentimes you will be in, sometimes for your first 2 years, really, you will be in classes that are upwards of 200, 300 students. And some students work well in a lecture hall, and they want to be in that environment, but some students don't. And so at a smaller school, smaller private school, oftentimes there'll be more seminar style. So it'll be more of sitting in a classroom with your classmates and your professor and having more of a discussion. So it's more discussion-based learning versus one person talking at you and doing a lecture presentation. And so it's just different styles. So thinking about how you learn best, I think, is really important. Some students really learn best by listening and absorbing that information. I found that I think a lot of our students, even if they're on the quieter side, because they're forced out of their comfort zone a little bit and are forced to participate in a lot of classes, that actually elevates their learning, because they can't slack off, right? You can sort of slack off in a lecture hall of 300 students because the professor might not even know your name. But in a smaller classroom of 17, it's pretty obvious if someone doesn't do the reading or doesn't do their work. And so obviously I might be a little biased, but I do think that there are pros and cons maybe to both experiences. And so I think it's about thinking about how you learn best and understanding that at a larger university, you might not have those smaller classes until your junior or senior year. So if you want that, that might not be the best fit for you. So just thinking about the learning style and how you learn best. And if you're kind of pushed out of your comfort zone, how will that elevate your academic experience? Okay, next question from Sapna. Would attending small colleges offer more access to faculty in terms of learning the curriculum? That's a really good question as well. I would say yes. Because of those small class sizes, because of the office hours at a lot of small colleges. So what office hours are students or faculty offering open door policy, basically. So being able to literally walk in and ask them any questions. I know our students utilize office hours a ton. And even if they can't make their office hours, like let's say you have a class during office hours at a small college, emailing your professor and just saying, hey, I have a class, I can't come to office hours. Are you able to meet with me at this time? And 9 times out of 10, they will say, absolutely, yes, I can. And so building that relationship is super, super easy, I think. And it kind of almost is forced to happen, I think, a lot of the time. At a larger school, I think if you want to make those connections, you really have to go out of your way to meet the professor, to make yourself known. So in some ways, it's a lot more of an effort on your part. So I think attending that smaller college, you do just naturally by process of numbers have a lot more access to faculty. And so, yeah, if you do have questions about learning the curriculum, going to those office hours, asking them after class, and saying, hey, I don't really understand this, or can we go deeper into this, or I have a question about this. That happens all the time. It's very easy to do. And if you have a question about it, you're not vying, with the professor's time with 300, 400 other students as well. So you and 15 other students might have the same question. And so that's much more manageable for them to answer those questions and sort of dive deeper into the curriculum. That's a good question, though. Okay, next question is, what would be the merit-based scholarships at Gettysburg College, and how can students apply for it? Very, very good question. So at Gettysburg College, we have four different levels of merit scholarship that range from 15,000 US dollars to 32,000 US dollars. And that is all students are eligible for merit scholarship just through your application. So you don't have to apply for it outside of the common application. We review all students. We look at your transcripts, look at your test scores if that's something you submit, and we'll review all students for merit scholarship. Now, we do have one scholarship that is $40,000. That is the Eisenhower Scholarship. And that is the only merit scholarship that has an additional application. So if you go to our website and you go to applying to Gettysburg, there's a section for merit scholarships, and they are listed out there. And the application for the Eisenhower Scholarship is also listed out. So the Eisenhower Scholarship, I would say the biggest difference and why there's a separate application is because it also involves civic engagement or community service or something along those lines. So if you're engaged in your community, if you're passionate about community service, that the Eisenhower Scholarship also takes that piece into consideration. So it's not just solely looking at your grades or academics. But besides that, every student is eligible for merit scholarship, whether you are test optional or whether you are submit test scores, it doesn't matter. All students are eligible for merit scholarship at Gettysburg, and we'll just look very closely again at your transcripts, at your SAT, ACT scores, and your English proficiency tests if you do submit them. So we'll kind of take all of that into consideration when we're looking to award merit scholarship. Okay, in reference to narrowing down the choices, is U.S. News and World Report a reliable indicator of the quality of colleges? That's a really good question. I get that one a lot, especially from international students too. And I think it really depends because I do think that it is all of the colleges on there are very good colleges, right? And so in that sense, it's a great list. However, I do think that rankings can be misleading oftentimes because each year the criteria can change for what is taken into consideration. So for instance, a couple of years ago, high school counselor recommendation was taken into consideration as a part of the U.S. News and World Report rankings. So what that means is U.S. News and World Report would survey counselors and ask them about these schools, and counselors would say, like, yes, this is a great school, and kind of rank them like that. And so that I think is a very valid way of utilizing high school counselors because we build relationships with them. They get to know our schools. We get to know the high schools. However, last year, they took out that piece in the U.S. News and World Report ranking. But that's not necessarily something you would know, right, as someone reading that list. And so a school might have dropped a couple spots. And from the outside perspective, you're like, oh, they dropped a couple spots. I wonder what happened. That's not very good. But then looking at it from the inside, sort of, it might be like, well, they just got a lot of really good counselor recommendations. And because that piece was removed, they dropped down a few spots. So I think that the criteria within all ranking systems can be misleading, to be quite honest. I do think that, again, all the schools on that list are good schools. And so in that way, I think it can be helpful to kind of, as a starting point, I also think it's really helpful to think about it in context, right? When we think about 4,000 accredited colleges and universities, just because a school is not top 5 does not mean it's not a good school, right? Because of how many schools there are. So honestly, just making that list in general is one of the top schools probably in the U.S. According to the criteria that the rankings set. So I think it's good to look at, it's good to understand, but maybe take it with a little bit of a grain of salt, right? It's definitely not a definite list, which is why also when you look at multiple sources, all the rankings are different. So that's just something to keep in mind, but that's a really good question. Okay, does it make a difference if we submit a recommendation letter by someone higher in rank, such as the school principal, or is it preferred from school counselors or our teachers? How many letters of recommendation should we submit? The question comes from Hardy. That's a very good question. So it usually a school will ask for letters of recommendation from a counselor and from a teacher. And the only reason I brought up school principal is because sometimes if a school, might not have a counseling office or not counseling in the way we would think about it in the United States or in schools that have a school counseling office, then oftentimes it will be a letter from the principal or a letter from the head teacher, for example. But if you have a counseling office and you have a school counselor, definitely get it from the counselor. And then usually, again, the letters of recommendation, it's depending on the requirements of the school in terms of number. So at Gettysburg, for instance, we require one counselor. Usually students only have one counselor, and then one teacher recommendation. You are free to submit more. I would say most students usually at Gettysburg submit two teacher recommendations. So one that's required and one sort of extra that just adds a little bit more depth to the recommendations. But to be quite honest, if a student just submits what is required, that is perfectly fine. I will read those letters of recommendation, and that is good. If they submit more, I will also read all the ones they submit. So you just need the requirement, but if you feel like, oh, I have two teachers who I know really well, who can definitely speak a lot about me as a person, as a student, then absolutely feel free to I think submit more than that. Okay, next question. How long should the essay be for us to express things in our own words? And what we include as a part of our story and not include? Some tips would be very helpful. Absolutely. So I can really only speak from the Gettysburg perspective in terms of length. So on the Common Application, the essay is pretty short. It's only about 650 words. And that might seem like too short. But I think really it doesn't have to be your entire life story necessarily. It can just be like a moment in time or an experience that you had. And I think including it, so if you're thinking about maybe what to include or what to not include, if you're thinking about maybe an experience that you had in an extracurricular activity, like a sport or a club, if you're passionate about community service, that's one we see a lot. If you had an experience where you traveled outside of your home country and had like a mission experience or had an experience of diving into another culture or a global experience, that's also something we read a lot about. Some students write very funny essays, so it doesn't have to be super serious. It can be funny about an experience that happened to you or a lesson that you learned. I think something to think about is like a time where you learned something, a time where you really, dove in and learned more about yourself or learned a life lesson. And that can, again, it doesn't have to be your entire life story necessarily, but it can just be maybe one particular instance where you dove in and you were like, I didn't think about it this way before, but I really learned this. Sports, extracurricular activities, traveling abroad. Those are topics we see a lot, but are just some examples. There are also prompts in the Common App. So for an essay, you can choose a prompt, and that might help guide a little bit about what you're talking about as well. Next question, if a college or university is test optional, does it mean it is not required for admissions or scholarships or both? Very good question. That, that will depend on each university. So for Gettysburg College, we are test optional, which means it is not required for admissions, and for us, it is not required for scholarships, but that will be dependent on the institution. So you definitely will just want to ask that question or look on the website of each school and see what that school says. So that will depend on each individual institution. What is your campus size and how many international students are there on campus? Good question. So we are about 2,600 students total. In terms of international students, we have about 145, I believe, on campus. So any given year, depending on the incoming class, we usually have anywhere between 30 to 40 international students. And I think it's a good number. I know that, when thinking about numbers, we usually think like the larger, the better. But I do think that a lot of our international students, like they want to make American friends, and they also want to learn about American culture, where they're going to school, and that sort of thing. And so I think it's a good number because they have people usually from their home country or people who are going through the same experience. So when you're just like, man, I'm tired of talking English today, right? Man, like I'm just tired of it. You can kind of go and have your own people and be with them. But then you can also have a lot of American friends or an American roommate and have that experience. So I do think it's a good balance. But numbers wise, that's roughly depending on the year. Do you require international freshmen to live on campus for the first year? And how does housing and meal plan work? So yes, all students live on campus for their first 3 years, actually. Most of our seniors also live on campus, quite honestly, our fourth year students, but they have a choice. They can request to move off campus. Housing will work. So as a first year student, you'll live on campus in a residence hall with other first year students, usually in a double. So students will live usually with one other roommate. As a first year student, the housing, the roommate assignment is random, which I know can scare a lot of students, I think. But the reason we've done it is because we've done it both ways. We've done it random and we've done it where students have requested roommates. We found that there were less issues and less problems with roommates when it was random than when students requested roommates, which was kind of interesting. So that's how the housing works. In terms of the meal plan, we have a dining hall on campus, which I should mention is ranked 11th in the nation for best campus food by the Princeton Review. So very good food. And as a first year student, you have unlimited access to the dining hall. So you never have to worry about really planning out your meals. You never have to worry about, oh, I ate breakfast yesterday, I can't eat lunch today. Nothing like that. You can go in and eat as many times as you want during the day. And so you never have to worry about it. There's always different food options. They rotate weekly. There's different stations in the dining hall. So we have a lot of international food as well, but a lot of different stations. There's a grill, there's a home style food station, there's salads, sandwiches, all different kinds every day. Really good food. So don't worry about going hungry. But that's a really good question. Would it be possible to provide a breakdown of tuition fees, housing, and meal expenses? Yes, absolutely. So off the top of my head, because it will change year to year, I don't want to tell you wrong numbers off the top of my head, and I know a lot of it just changed over the summertime for the upcoming year. So I would definitely be happy. I can go back to the slide if you want to email me I will definitely be happy to go over that in more detail. There's my email, my personal email. So definitely feel free to email me and I can give you the most updated information. I just don't want to say anything wrong. So feel free to email me, anyone who wants that information, and I can send it to you. Can you please share the GPA requirements to qualify for your admissions and scholarships? Yes, so we do not have cutoffs, which means that we don't say anyone under a 3.5 is not getting into school, not getting into Gettysburg, which also can be a difference between larger universities and private universities. Oftentimes, larger public universities do have a cutoff where they say, basically, if you have below a 3.3, we won't even look at your application. That's not true here. At Gettysburg, we are looking at your application as a whole. So we're taking all of those pieces into consideration. And that's something that is very important to us. On average, our average GPA is about a 3.6. So out of a 4.0 scale. So most students who are applying are around that number. However, do students with a 3.3 get into Gettysburg because they're taking really hard classes? Yes, they do. So it can be a little dependent on your experience, on the classes you're taking, on your test scores. In terms of scholarships, what I will say is that it's the same thing for scholarships. We don't have a number or a cutoff, but what I will say is that students who are getting scholarships are usually in the top 10 to 20% of their class. They usually are taking higher level courses in their school and doing well. So I would say mostly A's, maybe a few B's in those courses. Our top level of scholarships, usually, like, to give you a sense, our top level of scholarships are usually our students who have mostly straight A's and probably above a 1400 on the SAT, around there for our top tier merit scholarships. So that's just a ballpark. Again, it's not a cutoff. Students do get scholarships at those lower tier levels without having those really high numbers. But just to give you kind of a sense, because there is no strict cutoff or numbers. What are the documents required to apply to Gettysburg College when admissions would open for fall of 2021? Yes, so we have, if you go to our website, and I can also put this link in the chat if it will be helpful. Underneath admissions and aid and applying to Gettysburg, all the documents are listed there, but a basic run through: common application are required, high school transcripts. So we talked about those, letters of recommendation. If you submit your test scores, in terms of SAT, ACT, those must be submitted. For international students, English proficiency, again, that can be waived if your schooling is majority in English for the past 2 years. And then in terms of financial aid for non-US citizens, we require international student financial aid application, as well as the certification of finances form. So those are largely the pieces of the application. It's not too many. So if you go to our website, though, to check that out, it'll be listed in a little bit more detail, but those are essentially the documents that are required. All right. Can you share about on-campus part-time work opportunities for international students? Yeah, absolutely. So some opportunities that I know international students have done. They've worked in the admissions office as tour guides. So being able to give tours to prospective students. They have worked in Brad's office, so the International Student Services office, just kind of helping out, doing like different office work in that setting, whatever Brad kind of needs done, working on projects. I know we have a lot of jobs in sometimes in our college union building, which is a good like student space, study space, hangout center. But there are coffee shops in there. There's different eateries. So students sometimes work at those coffee shops, sometimes work at the eatery. A lot of offices will always have jobs. So for instance, we have our study abroad office, our Center for Global Education. They will often have student workers who will work and help out there. So any pretty much like office on campus, admissions, communications and marketing, study abroad, will have job opportunities for students. Usually once you get to campus, we have something called Handshake, which is an online platform where all these jobs are listed. So once you get to campus, you can look for those jobs and then just apply through Handshake. And Brad's office, the International Student Services Office, will oftentimes help students go through that process. I would like to know more about what campus life is like and the extracurricular activities available for international students. Absolutely. So as I mentioned before, campus is very residential. So students will live on campus for all 4 years, which means that you are around students from all over the world, all over the country, and all different class years. So it's not segregated by, first year, sophomore, junior, senior. Nothing like that. You're really going to be integrated with a lot of different students. We have over 120 different clubs on campus. Students will be introduced to those clubs within your first few days on campus. So if you want to get involved with different clubs, you have access to getting involved there. We're Division III in the athletics, and so we have 24 different varsity athletic sports. A lot of our students are involved in campus recreation in some way, shape, or form. So we have a very nice athletic center, and in the athletic center, there's like a gym, obviously a workout room. There's basketball gym. Is actually a huge rock climbing wall. So if you're interested in rock climbing, there's yoga, there's Zumba classes, all different kinds of extracurricular kind of fitness activities, along with the clubs. Some examples of clubs, there'll be clubs you find at a lot of schools in the US, different like affinity groups or science groups, science major groups, but also like fun clubs. So there's club sports like club soccer, club rugby, or a bunch of different, there's one that's the barbecue pitmaster club. So if you're interested in barbecuing US style, then you can join that club. So there's a lot of different extracurricular activities. We also have something called the Campus Activities Board, which is basically a club that plans different events for students. So they will plan events every year, every weekend of every year. So basically Friday through Thursday, Friday, Saturday, planning events for students. And so there's always something to do on campus. Some of those events are like a coffee house night. So going and listening to live music, or we have different games. Something that is really neat that I will show you, that I believe I have a picture of. So this picture is actually from one of our international festivals called Berg Burst. We have our international students from all over the world. They'll wear traditional dress, do traditional dance or song or music, and have food from all different countries. And so the college community gets together. We all celebrate it, all the different cultures. And it's just a really awesome night. And so different events like that will happen as well. International Food Festival, one of my favorite days of the year at Gettysburg, because I just get to eat really good food from all over the world. It's amazing. So you will never be bored on campus. Very, very active campus. Yes, campus safety. Absolutely. So campus safety is obviously paramount. And as a small college, we don't have a lot of issues really at all. It's very easy to walk to places. You can get around campus super easy. Also, I'm sure if you've listened to any US college talk, you'll hear about the blue light system. So the blue light system is essentially these different stations on campus with these blue light bulbs on them. And you can go, if you're feeling unsafe for whatever reason, basically you can always see a blue light station from another blue light station. They're all around campus. And if you ever feel unsafe, there's a button on there with a microphone, and you can talk to campus safety and they can come pick you up. Our Department of Public Safety on campus is open 24 hours all year round. So if there ever is a moment where you have an issue, they're accessible. They will come. They can come help you, pick you up, take you back to your dorm if you're studying late at night somewhere. But Gettysburg is a very, very safe place. It's a small town. It's a nice town. Everyone kind of knows each other. Everyone knows the college students. They love the college students. So I don't feel that it's ever a large issue, but those resources are in place if you do have a problem or anything like that. Can you take us to the slide with your email address? Yes. Hopefully you might have seen it earlier, but there it is again. What are popular majors at Gettysburg, and how can students pursue a double major in computer science and public policy? Very good question. Some of our top majors actually are business organizations and management studies, economics, psychology, health science is also very popular at Gettysburg. And so I think it can be a little surprising, especially people who think liberal arts. Oh, wait, business and economics are your top majors? That's in terms of number of students, but those are very robust, good programs as well. A lot of research, political science as well. So students will do a lot of research in that. The social sciences are very big here at Gettysburg, just to name a few. But I think every program is very strong, even in terms of, even if the number of students are less, you still have tenured faculty who have PhDs in their field who are teaching these courses, right? No course is taught by teachers' assistants or upperclassmen or anything like that. It's all faculty. So always a very, very high level. How can students pursue a double major? It's fairly easy, I think, because of the way the curriculum is structured. I don't want to say easy. You do have to plan, but it's not impossible. And so, for instance, in computer science and public policy, it would basically be just being able to make sure that you're choosing your courses wisely so that you can take courses in both disciplines at the same time. And so the curriculum, how it's structured, is basically that 1/3 of it will be your major, 1/3 will be the liberal arts requirements, so classes that you have to take outside of your major. And then the last third is open for a double major, a minor, something along those lines. And so you can use that last third of the curriculum to fulfill those different requirements for a double major. And so that's how a lot of students do it. Oftentimes it'll come from taking a class, that might be designed to fulfill a general requirement. And you're like, wow, I'm really interested in this. Let me pursue this as well. To answer your specific question, in terms of public policy is actually a required double major at Gettysburg. So it's a required dual major. So you have to pair it with something else anyway. And that is the way the major is structured to begin with. So it's definitely doable. You definitely have to, be on top of it, but it's absolutely doable. And a lot of our students do it. What study abroad experiences can students participate in? I almost read that as can parents participate in. And I was like, well, is it open to international students? Absolutely. So about 60% of our students overall study abroad. Our international students study abroad as well. We have a variety of different programs, over 100 different programs that we partner with all across the world. So students who want that abroad experience as an international student, you're absolutely able to do that. You'll work with our study abroad office, our Center for Global Education, to figure out what program is best for you. Do you want to do a homestay program? Do you want to go to a college or university in a different country and do more traditional, live in a dorm style, that sort of thing? Some students will do research focused programs. Some students will do more liberal arts programs. You can really pick and choose what is best for you. And working with the Center for Global Education, they make it super easy, super accessible at Gettysburg. It's something that's really important to us to make it accessible. So they'll really help you alleviate a lot of the costs. So like tuition, fees, all of that is the same as if you were here at Gettysburg College. They'll give you a flight stipend. They'll oftentimes, if the meal plan is like the school doesn't do the meal plan the same as we do, they'll give you a stipend for the meal plan. And they'll make it just really easy and accessible for you to have that study abroad experience. So it's absolutely open for international students who want to do it. I would say, it's probably 50-50 with our international students. Some are like, yep, going to America is my study abroad experience. I'm good with that. And then some students are like, no, I want to use this opportunity to go visit another country as well and do a semester there. So whatever you want to do, you have access to it. What would be your academic calendar? When do semesters start and when do they end? Very good question. So our academic calendar, our semester, I'm going to go with a normal year. This year with COVID, it has shifted a little bit. In a normal year, our semester will start at the end of August. The first semester will start at the end of August and go until about the middle of December. There's a couple shorter breaks in there for American Thanksgiving. But besides that, it's pretty much that. Then students will have about a month off. Students will sometimes go back home or stay with friends or something like that. And then a month off from the middle of December to the middle of January. And then from January, the mid-January to about middle of May is the second semester. And so that encompasses a full academic year. So that will be 1 year. This year, because of COVID, we have pushed up our fall semester. So it's about mid-August to the Thanksgiving break, which is the end of November. And then we are having students take a little bit more time off before they come back for the spring. So that's the plan right now. But in a normal year, yeah, mid-August to mid-January, or I'm sorry, mid-August to mid-December, a month off, and then mid-January to about mid-May. All right, and then last question, how does the admissions process work for your honors program? So we don't necessarily have a specific honors program at Gettysburg because it's such a rigorous place academically. We sort of consider everything the equivalent of an honors program. I think that's also a large difference between probably a lot of larger universities and small private schools. I would say this is a generalization, but oftentimes the rigor at a small private school may be equivalent to an honors program. And so we don't necessarily have anything that a separate program for harder courses because all of our courses are very academically rigorous. Whereas sometimes at larger institutions, the honors programs have different requirements just because of the massive amount of students that they have to accommodate. There is a difference there. So there is no specific honors program at Gettysburg, just the regular academic program and applying to that like we talked about before. Well, thank you guys so much for all those really great questions. I'm really glad that you could join me today and spend some of your time with me. I just really appreciate you being here. So thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much, Marco. It was really, really nice. A very informative presentation, I must say, about Gettysburg College. Actually, on one of the slides that you have, my cousin, which I was telling you about, Shub, he is enrolled out there. So if you go back to the slide which has the students, the 4 students, one of the first slides, students, I can show you who my cousin is. Counselors, he's having a wonderful experience. He has nothing but great things to say whenever we meet. So if you want to know a little bit more, I'm happy to connect you with my cousin Shub. The one which is slightly before Marco.
Oh,
It
this
is with
one?
one of the first few slides. After this one, I think it's the second or the fourth or the fifth slide. With the 4 students standing next to each other. Yep.
Oh,
I think that's the one. The one. Yep, that's the one. So you see the
okay.
one who has the Drive T-shirt, the black one with the cup noodles in the hand. That's my cousin with a little bit of a beard. So his name is Shub Parekh, and he's part of the program, and he has nothing but great things to say. And I know his parents very well. They're very happy, very satisfied with the personal attention that they have been receiving all the time. And he's also got a good scholarship. And I think the professor experience is something that he's really enjoying. So students, if you have questions, counselors, I know you all are listening in on this call, parents, please feel free to connect with me. I'll be happy to connect you with my cousins so you can take these conversations forward. Having said that, please join me in saying thank you to Mr. Marco Blasco once again. to join us very early in the morning from the States. And once again, for a wonderful presentation. You took so much time in answering all of these great questions, about an hour or so to answer questions. So we really appreciate your time in answering all of the wonderful questions. Students, parents, and counselors, it's 7 p.m. here in the evening. So thank you to you as well. We know it's late in the evening and way right after your school hours, and it's been a long day. So thank you once again for staying put throughout this entire session. As you have noted down, please note down Mr. Marco Blasco's email address so that these conversations continue, we hope, way past after this webinar is over. Having said that, it's a wrap for the day. The recording will be shared with your school as well, counselors, so that other students who are not able to join us in the evening are able to join us, are able to listen in and get in touch with the admissions representative who's here today. Thank you once again, Mr. Marco. We truly appreciate your kind time. Please give our regards to Danielle, and we wish you a wonderful day and look forward to keeping in touch with you. Thank you once again.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.